This is a response to xTheEmpiricalTruthx, who posted a video response to a video I had made. Was a response to a Catholic priest. I'll put the link down in the description so you can see it and see what's going on. Try to follow all of this if you care. I'm actually going to use the empirical truth as a basically a catch-all, because I've had several people make similar criticisms, and so much so that I just stopped responding in the comments, and it's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating because for me it looks like that people have not been actually watching my video, or if they are, they're not paying any attention. They attribute to me things that I never said. No one actually quotes. I mean, that's helpful, right? That's what I did with Father Barron in his video when I was looking at what he said. I either quoted or I paraphrased specific things that he said. I addressed specifics. I didn't say, I think what he means is. I was completely charitable, and I was nice, and I have not been treated the same, and it's fine, but it's frustrating to have people endlessly attribute to me things that I did not say or mean. So I'm going to address some specific things to the empirical truth in terms of the video that he made, because he made specific criticisms. I'm going to quickly get those out of the way, but they apply to several people who've said several things, and I wrote some things down just so I can keep up, so I know for a fact that I'm addressing specific things that he said. So the first thing he talks about is this idea of discrimination versus discrimination, that there are two different definitions. One discrimination is that the connotation of it being unjust, right? So you discriminate against something unfairly. And then there's this other definition, that's someone who has discriminating taste, someone who just tells the difference between things. To discriminate between one thing and another, that's all that really means, is to tell the difference between one thing and another. And he says that he thinks that Father Barron is possibly using that kind of definition as opposed to the definition that we think of as unjust or unfair discrimination. I want to be clear that I'm not sure where in the video he's talking about Father Barron doing that. He doesn't say, he doesn't offer quotes. But the reason I talk about discrimination the way I do, which is only in quotes, is only in quotes of Father Barron. That's all that I do is quote him when I'm talking about that word. And he's quoting Justice Kagan. So you can go back and watch that video and then watch his video and follow this. Let me say that as to the definition of discrimination that's being used with Father Barron's obviously concerned with this idea of discrimination is unjust. And we know this first because of his description of Justice Kagan talking about a red flag. This whole, it raises the red flag of discrimination when someone talks about, raises moral arguments, and this in from his video when he was talking about that. There'd be no talk of a red flag, of a warning, if the idea were merely that one is discriminating between two different things, that you're just telling the difference between one thing over here and another thing over here. If that's all that were going on, no one would be worried about some sort of red flag. There'd be no need for a warning. Further, the concern that Father Barron raises is that attempting to have, the whole point of his video, is that attempting to have moral discussions in general results in one being thought of as a bigot. Clearly, then, this can't be just telling different things apart, because bigot is something negative. A bigot is something you don't want to be. A bigot is a bad thing. Bigots are people who are unjustly discriminating. That's the point. So no one else is talking about discrimination in any other sense. Father Barron did not talk about it. He didn't attribute to Justice Kagan this idea of discrimination as merely telling two things apart. And I didn't talk about that. We are all consistent, so I don't have any idea where this notion of discrimination versus discrimination, why you think that's relevant. I don't have any idea. No one talked about that in the videos. So because of that, I think that you've really missed Father Barron's point, and then the criticism that I make of him in its entirety. So Father Barron is using Kagan's quote as a way of showing that when anyone attempts to have moral arguments, that it results in that any time one makes moral arguments, that results in someone being accused of unjust discrimination. That as soon as I raise a moral argument, that I'm called a bigot. That's Father Barron's whole point there. That's everything he's talking about. So that's the thing that I'm addressing, right? My point there, like I made in my video, but since so many people missed it, I'll make it again, even though I'm explicit, is that he's ignoring the context. That when he says that, he's not paying any attention to where Justice Kagan would have been saying this. The context is such that the moral arguments raised in legal issues have a long tradition of being used as a way of unjustly discriminating against people. Whether those are people attempting to justify laws against race or against sex or against the poor or whatever. I mean, right? So we even have poll taxes all the way back. When people talk about, in general, when we're talking about laws, and people have said we have this moral obligation to prevent some group of people from doing a certain kind of thing, and that's gone to the Supreme Court because everyone disagrees, then when people have used that kind of moral argument, that it's often, very often, been as a way of unjustly discriminating against the people, the group of people in question. So that's why Kagan would talk about a red flag. And in fact, that seems to be a legitimate concern. And ignoring that context, ignoring that what's going on is that Kagan is a Supreme Court justice addressing a specific instance and treating it as Father Barron does as some sort of general thing that you can't have moral arguments because then you're guilty of unjust discrimination, misses everything. And that was my criticism. That was my criticism. That the context here matters, and that Kagan, when she's talking about this red flag, has a legitimate concern, which is not to say that you cannot make moral arguments at any time in cases anything having to do with in any sort of legal sense. Rather that one needs to be wary, one needs to be cautious, that there is a red flag raised. It's a warning. Let's pay close attention to that and ensure that someone is not merely discriminating in an unjust way against a specific group of people. That was the issue. That's all there was to it. Everyone has missed my point, and I don't know why everyone has missed my point, because I was explicit, I was succinct, I was clear. It's become exhausting. So, I'll address something here. Now, the next thing, you talk about this idea, you criticize me and say that I'm wrong when I said that the link between laws and morals is tenuous. And you said, no, that's not true. And lots of people have said that's not true. I actually stopped replying to comments because I just had tons of people saying the exact same thing, and I got tired of posting the exact same response and no one listening. So here's what I want to say. The idea that laws simply reflect morals, that our legal obligations and our moral obligations are identical, it's not just that it's untrue, it's transparently untrue. It's clearly untrue. And it's standard stuff, and this is not something I'm making up. I'm not now coming from some sort of radical viewpoint. If you guys go and do any sort of like legal philosophy, right? If there are big basic questions here. If it were true the case that moral obligations and legal obligations are in fact identical, then entire fields of discussion would be wiped out. Thered be no need for them, right? So just go look up. Don't take my word for it. Go look up legal reasoning versus moral reasoning. There's libraries of stuff written about this. Because legal reasoning and moral reasoning are not identical, we can talk about the differences between them ad infinitum, forever, right? And also you have this huge fertile ground of discussion about which obligations hold more power when your legal obligations and your moral obligations come into conflict. When there is a law that conflicts with your moral obligations, which one holds sway? And of course, if moral obligations and legal obligations were identical, if legal obligations merely reflected moral obligations, there would be no room for any such kind of discussion. It's not just that this is not the case. It's obviously not the case. And I'm tired of having the same little debate over and over, only to be ignored. I guess what I want to say is, go read up on this stuff, because you're just wrong. So the next issue that you raise, that the empirical truth raises, is that I'm somehow operating from some sort of different moral framework than conservative Christians or the Catholics or both, whatever. I didn't address any morals. Here's what I want to say. So the entire line of discussion there is irrelevant to anything in my video. I didn't make any kinds of moral claims. I didn't say what was or wasn't morally appropriate. I didn't even make legal claims either. I didn't say what the law should be. I didn't do anything like that. I criticized some of the arguments that some of the flaws that I believe are in Father Barron's arguments. But I didn't myself then put forth any sort of positive assertion about how I think things should be. So, what I said, the whole point of my video was that Father Barron uses these arguments to back up his main point that it's difficult in society to have debates about morals. And he raises these things. And I agreed, I said at the first of my video, I agree with Father Barron that it's difficult to have these moral arguments. But that I think, in fact, the kinds of criticisms that he makes they're not well grounded. And that what he ends up doing is falling into that same sort of trap. That when we should be having a moral argument, he ends up either offering up straw men's or just radically uncharitable interpretations of the arguments at hand, and ends up falling prey to the exact same thing that he wants to criticize. I was clear and unambiguous about that, and apparently people don't get it. They're not watching my video. They want to find some secret message that's hidden in there rather than addressing what I actually say. It would be nice if you guys would quote me. Then you would find that you don't have the quotes to back up what you think I mean. You might then rethink the criticisms you have. It would be nice, like I quoted Father Barron, or if I didn't quote him, I paraphrased him as close as possible. I addressed specific things in his video. It'd be nice if you guys did that with me rather than just making these sort of blanket criticisms that you think that I mean. So, there's nothing about any sort of moral framework is irrelevant because I'm not saying how things should be. That's not what I was doing. I'm saying that Father Barron was mistaken about the three arguments that he used to support his main point. Not that his main point was mistaken, but you can't get there from the three arguments that he made. That's what I did. So there's no issue if moral framework ever comes into play here. Lastly, and this is a big one. It's not only frustrating, it makes me angry. So, I never said anything like, here's the empirical truth attributes to me something like, he says, I have this idea that we live in a secular state, and so you don't get a word here. You don't have a say in things because you're a conservative Christian, because this is secular. I never said any such thing. I never said anything like that. I don't hold any such position. I think that people should be able to talk or shout or scream their opinions about things to anyone who will listen. I am steadfastly opposed to the idea that people can't talk, that they can't say things out loud. And it's wildly frustrating to have any such position attributed to me because I don't hold it, I didn't suggest it. There's nothing like that in anything I said. Here's the deal though. Here's the deal. Freedom of speech is not freedom from criticism. Right? So you are absolutely free to go out and say anything you want. Father Barron can absolutely come out and criticize anybody he wants. He can criticize Justice Kagan. He can criticize the government at large. He can criticize anything he wants. But because he has that right, does not then mean that other people cannot come along and criticize him. On the contrary, the whole point of freedom of speech is that you can come along and criticize anyone you want. So you can criticize and you can get criticized. Both are legitimate. You are not free from criticism merely because you have freedom of speech. That's not what it's about. Everyone gets to have speech. Everyone. Including the people who disagree with you. So I am not trying to shut up anyone. On the contrary, I want everyone to speak loudly. I want everyone to voice their opinions. And it's infuriating to have such a position attributed to me by someone else. Next time you want to do something like that, quote me. Because you'll never find anything in my videos that says anything remotely like that. Lastly, I want to say this idea, because the empirical truth follows up, he finishes with this notion that there's something against Christians, that they're unable to speak up here in the United States. That's absurd. It's absurd. Christians make up the overwhelming majority of the populace here in the U.S. They can say they get their way. Everyone's a Christian. Everyone gives lip service to Christianity. You can't get elected without being a Christian. The country is overwhelmingly Christian. The idea that Christians are somehow relegated to silence. That you don't get shut down. You get airtime. Christians get all the airtime they want. No one comes along to tell you to shut up or put you in prison or anything like that. It just seems that Christians don't like it when someone else comes along and says, hey, I think you're mistaken. And that's ridiculous. We're all here. We all have freedom of speech. No one's telling Christians to shut up. That's it. That's the main thing I want to say. If you have anything else to say to me, if you want to make another response, I strongly urge you to respond to specifics rather than saying, I think you mean. Actually say what I said. So, because I mean what I say. There's nothing secret. There's nothing hidden. So address that. And then we'll get along much better.